the Budget Committee. I know that you've thought about these issues extensively, and we look forward to your comments. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us to do this. I've heard several discussions previously in other folks' testimony about the House rules and changing the House rules, and I do think that's important. I think we have to take a good look at a review of our House rules. The rules do matter. I should probably mention, of course, that I'm always a proponent of returning to the Holman Rule and being able to change the rules we have related to designating things as mandatory spending. And many people in the country think that mandatory spending are only the big programs you hear about. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of little programs that qualify for mandatory spending that I think we need to take a look at. That's not really the purpose of my comments this morning, but with the discussion of rules, I find myself drawn to do that. I do think it's important that we also recognize that the House and the Senate are in fact supposed to operate independently of each other. Jefferson was very clear about that, and it wasn't that many years ago that you could not, in debate on a subject bill, discuss Senate action or what the Senate was likely to do. I think personally we probably ought to go back to that, because too often we'll hear in debate people say a bill won't pass in the Senate. It's not our job. Our job is to figure out what we think is right as members of the House. We have a bicameral legislature for a reason. The Founding Fathers didn't want it to be just one body of the closest representatives to the people, that would be us in the House, or just those at the time appointed by the legislature but representing an entire state, now elected. So I do think it's important that we recognize that. And that then brings us to the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974. Now, I've often wondered, and I've answered the question twice, but sometimes I forget things, have to go back and look at it again, how it is we're bound by a 1974 act when it's dealing with the rules and the processes in the House. And the answer is because when we take that first vote every year on the rules to govern us for the following 2 years, after every election, we reincorporate automatically the provisions of the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974. Those are not working for us, and we've seen that. It's time that we go back and take a look at what we're doing. I'm not going to tell you that I have the answer on that one, but I do know that it was anticipated by the Founding Fathers that each House would have its own rules, each House would make its decisions, and if we decide to reform our process, we need not worry that the Senate may not like it or may not go along with it. It's none of their business. And it was also contemplated even in the Act itself, and I quote from the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, where it says, Section 9042 says, with full recognition of the constitutional right of either House to change such rules so far as relating to such House at any time, in the same manner and to the same extent as is the case of any other rule of such House. In fact, not to do so, not to go back and take a look at this, I think is negligent on our part. Doesn't mean we change it, but we ought to look at it every 2 years, because the courts have routinely ruled that one body cannot bind another. In other words, the House from 1974 can't bind the House in 2017. And yet we find ourselves just by habit binding ourselves to something that may have been the right thing to do in 1974, but it's clearly not working for us now. We chain ourselves to that process. We say to ourselves, well, that's the way it's been done now for 30 or 40 years. But when it's not working the way it's supposed to, it's up to us as elected members to change it. So I hope that you'll work on that. I'm happy to work on it. I just don't have any magic formulas to offer you today other than don't be afraid to break outside the box and come up with all new processes. I think that's probably what we need to do. Then I will have to tell you that I think that we should be looking at a biennial budget. I would even say biennial appropriations. I served in the Virginia legislature for 17 years. I can tell you that there was a year in particular, 2001, where the House and the Senate, both controlled by Republicans, could not get their trains on the same track, and we were not able to come up with revisions to our budget and appropriations process, which were one and the same in Virginia. Didn't damage the Commonwealth of Virginia because we had a biennial budget. And in 2001, we just operated on the budget we'd passed the previous year and on the appropriations passed the previous year. So it left us the ability to work on other things. And yes, we wanted to get a budget that year. And yes, there was consternation because we couldn't make changes. We had extra money we could have spent. We did not spend that money because we could not agree. But nothing happened. And I think it's a better process of government when you do a biennial budget and then you have your appropriations likewise lined up on a 2-year cycle. because you don't have the constant fighting over the budget process and over the Appropriations Acts. So I would say to you that I think these are important things that we need to do. My written statement goes into more of that, and I appreciate the time that you've allotted me, and I yield back.
Thank you so much again for your work on this. We look forward to continuing to work together. Mr. Hardy,